Welcome to the Nature of Education podcast. On today's episode, we're going to be speaking with Ursula McDermott, and we're going to be having an interesting conversation about education, mental health. We're going to understand what craniosacral therapy is, or at least hope to understand. And Ursula, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Cormac. It's a pleasure to be here.
So maybe first, if you could start off by just sharing a bit about your own journey and your own background, and I suppose how you found yourself in the work that you do today.
So I grew up in Sligo and I lived abroad for many years. I've lived, I would say, an experiential life. I studied medical science here, and then I studied the master's education in Jerusalem. And then I went on to study holistic modalities like craniosacral therapy and narrative therapy. And then I went on to do a master's in clinical counselling in the States. I would say the message that I received on an experiential level from all of that is that really we are co-creators rather than controllers. In many ways, I was thinking this morning, in many ways, maybe it's like the farmer. We till the soil and we plant the seed. We set an intention, we make an effort, but Cormac, we never have control over outcomes. So I think in my life journey until now, that was a really big learning through education and the holistic modalities and the clinical piece, that we set intentions, we make reasonable efforts, but we don't control outcomes.
I love that, because I think in the world most of us grew up in was maybe trying to control our futures and trying to control what's going to happen. So it's great to see that you've come to that understanding from all of the different studies you've done and your own experience. And I can completely agree with that. It's important to have your intention and set your effort, but if you can let go of the outcome, then you might be a bit happier. But so really interesting. And in terms of education, how do you feel that would link into education and the way we teach in schools?
Well, I think in order to be able to let go of outcomes, one has to feel safe. And because letting go of outcomes is facing and being able to face uncertainty. And I think in the past few years with, the pandemic, first of all, and now there's a lot of uncertainty in the world, I think we're being forced more into that place of realizing that there is a lot of uncertainty. We don't have so much control. And how do we negotiate that? So with regard to education, I think safety is really a very big element of education today, creating safe space.
Yeah. And I suppose, how do you feel that teachers could do that in the classroom? How do they make it a safe space?
Maybe I'll actually answer that through the lens of craniosacral therapy. And in craniosacral therapy, it's a branch of osteopathy. And the premise is that there's an inner physician. Like we have an innate wisdom in us. And there is, there's a quote from Fritz Smith, MD, and he says, if you can balance something to neutral without comparison, without judgment, it naturally moves to its highest potential. So that's again back to, we create the space. We're not about fixing and controlling. We create the space and the conditions. We have clear, consistent boundaries. And then we co-create rather than control. So I think for education, that's also really important to focus on creating the space, consistent boundaries, and then allow and trust that growth will happen.
Yeah, I love that. I remember doing a workshop for some school leaders over in the EU last year, and one of the slides I had was talking about the word education, and where the root of the word education comes from is the Latin educere, which means to draw out. So it's, as you said there, it's not about putting information in, it's about, getting them to that space of safety so you can draw out what's natural and their potential will naturally come out. So I love that. And in terms of craniosacral, just for people who maybe don't understand it, would you care to just describe what it is and how you work with people?
Sure. So it's, as I say, it's a branch of osteopathy. It's based on a gentle listening touch, and it works with three components, with the bone, the tissue, and the fluid. And what we're really looking for are restrictions. And restrictions can be caused physically, like if you fall, you injure your back, that causes a restriction. Also, emotional encounters, adverse emotional encounters cause, impact the cells and cause restrictions as well. So with the hands on, the hands are listening. Again, it's not fixing or controlling. We're listening for the restrictions. And if I was to describe what a restriction feels like, it's like if you see like an eddy or a current in the water, and it's kind of a chaotic motion. And when that, goes on further, it gathers branches and twigs, and it becomes an entity rather than just an energy. And that's what happens in the body as well. Like when we have this, whether you fall and hurt yourself or somebody yells at you and it impacts you deeply, it causes a chaotic motion in the body, whether it's in the bone or the tissue with fluid. And over time, that becomes substantial, and it manifests as, what we might call a cyst, for instance, or a disease. So if we can catch that when it's still in the energetic phase of chaotic motion, then it doesn't have to necessarily follow through into manifesting as a cyst or a disease. So that's really, I suppose, the basis of craniosacral therapy, and knowing that there's this inner physician. And the hand placement is like, if I can give an analogy, it's like if you're setting the table and you put the tablecloth over the cutlery instead of the other way around. So if I put my hand on the tablecloth, I can feel the cutlery through. I can recognize that's a knife and that's a fork. And so likewise with craniosacral, you're very grounded in anatomy. And when you put the hands on the body, you can feel, there's the liver, there's the kidney, and they each have their motion. So the hands-on component and the listening component is a little bit like that, like feeling something under a cloth where you can identify it because you know what it is, and then you can work with it.
Mm. Yeah, that's brilliant, just to get that understanding. And in terms of your work, do you work mainly with young people or adults as well? Or what do you see as well if you're working with young people? Is there much difference do they have less of these, I suppose, blocks in the body?
Well, I work with, young people from toddlers, prenatal even, and toddlers, young people, and also adults. And really the presentations can be, as I say, a child or a baby that starts crawling and they're having difficulty turning over, for instance. So that's more a mechanical, like adjusting or helping the body to balance and create symmetry in the body. It can also presentations can be hormonal issues with puberty, with infertility, and also, interestingly enough, more structural things would be expanding the palate, for instance, you can do with craniosacral therapy. So you can work with mechanical, on a mechanical level or on an emotional level. For instance, presentations of depression or anxiety, all have to do with the hormonal system. The anxiety, obviously, the kidneys and the cortisol, and the depression, more the neurotransmitters. So these chemicals in the body are out of balance when the emotions manifest as depression, for instance, or anxiety. And we can also help to rebalance those chemicals, which would be a fluid component, with a gentle listening touch. Yeah, there's another quote which I like very much, and I would recommend this person as Peter Levine. He wrote a very basic book and very helpful, I think, in the 60s, called "Waking the Tiger." And he says there that when you feel your body is a container, then emotions and sensations are less overwhelming because they are contained. So it's like if you're pouring me a glass of water and you just put a little drop in the glass, then it's kind of underwhelming. Like the container is big and it's only a little bit. And if you keep on pouring and it over spills my glass, the boundaries of the glass, then that's overwhelming. That would be an anxiety, maybe presentation. Whereas if you fill my glass just, below the top, then the boundary contains the content in a balanced way. So I think that's really what we're aiming for, that not underwhelm, which might be like a depression presentation where I'm happy about the getting up in the morning, there's nothing to get up for in the morning. Or the overwhelm, which is more of an anxiety presentation, which would be like too much going on. I can't cope with what's going on. So we want to feel the boundary of the body, first of all, and then to know this much is good for me, this is too much, and this is too underwhelming for me. So the body as a boundary is a really good indication.
Yeah, that's a brilliant analogy. It really, really makes sense. And yeah, it's just even from my own experience with emotions and starting to become used to allowing them to move through the body. And yeah, it can be overwhelming at times if it's new to you. But I suppose, as you said, this work is to build your capacity to hold more stress and emotions, and then be able to let them go as well. And yeah, I love that. It just makes a lot of sense now, the difference between, anxiety and depression, because a lot of the time we use them in the same phrase as if they're, pretty much the same thing in some ways. But it's important to know those differences, because a lot of young people, when I go into schools and deliver workshops, a lot of young people are experiencing anxiety. Depression's still quite a big struggle for people as well. So it's great to have more of an understanding of how it works in the body, because I think most people at the moment still think of it as something in the mind, but we have to start to understand that, the body and the mind are, all interlinked in one. So it's great to, because talk therapy has its limits, I feel. And if we can bring people into the body, like with the work you're doing, then we can start to, they can start to move through these things more and build their capacity. So yeah, it's brilliant.
And I think also, I think there's, the primary safety of the body came from the mother holding the baby. And that's what gave the baby the regulation. And I think, until we're able to do that ourselves, because we've been through things in life and the body doesn't always feel safe. So I think that is the place for a therapist to do that holding for you, to kind of reparent you or strengthen your own sense of container until you can rebuild your container yourself. So I think, the therapist is role modeling an imperfect mothering, which all of us had, because no mother is perfect, because she wasn't perfectly mothered. And that's the point, is to rehold and create safe space to regulate, and then have the person become independent in their own regulation. And we're all on the spectrum, Cormac. Like, I think it's really important to remember that from the depression end, which is lethargic more, to the anxiety end, which is hyper more, we are all on that spectrum. Some are more balanced in the middle, some are more towards depression, some are more towards anxiety. But it's a great unifier to think that nobody is not on that. And I think it takes away the stigma also, and some amount of, certainly in this country, shame around these things. There's a sociologist, she says that shame gets its power from being unspeakable. So, the more that we have all this unspeakable stuff inside us because we think we're different to everybody else, it just augments so much shame and the things. So we are all on the spectrum. And I think that's a great unifier, and I think we need to really embrace that.
Yeah, I love that, because a lot of people you would hear say, do you have mental health issues? And when they ask me that question, I'm like, I don't know how to answer that, because I'm like, I'm just human. I experience depression, and at times I can be experiencing anxiety for certain reasons, but I would never say that I have mental health issues. I would just say I'm human. So yeah, I love that we're all on this spectrum that changes depending on what's going on in our lives. And yeah, it completely gets rid of that stigma that, someone is something different because of their experiencing these things. It's just human. But yeah, I love that. So yeah, in terms of working with parents, you speak to parents, and what I suppose would be some of the advice that they can do? I obviously are speaking about craniosacral and creating that safety. But as a parent, if you don't have those skills, is there anything you can do, or say with your teenager or with a younger child, anything you can do to support them if they're experiencing anxiety or any of these symptoms?
So, Cormac, I would say a really important thing is to know thyself. Like, to be able to do what I'm calling in-reach more than outreach. Because I think there's a lot of outreach going on, like to the professional or to the school principal or to the GP, and it's born in part out of busyness. The parents are busy, and but it leads to dependence, and it leads to diminishment, I think, of ourselves, and then disappointment when they don't, when this professional or doesn't produce, and anger, and it goes down like a route that isn't always helpful. So I think the focus is too much on outreach instead of in-reaching to our own capacities. And that's scary. Like, it's kind of dare to in-reach, because if you haven't befriended your own monsters, then you're not going to want to go inside. So, and if you haven't done that, then all of those parts of you that you kind of have shoved away inside you, they are going to manifest in your children. It's like a cosmic sense of humor, And the child that you find, least easy to love is the child that is just like you. And you didn't take care of those pieces of yourself that were wounded. So to see it in someone else outside of yourself is so threatening that it's you don't want to deal with that child. And the second reason I think why in-reach is very difficult is because if we don't have a value system, then when you're in-reach, you kind of hit empty. So I think, in-reach is important, and in order to in-reach, you need to befriend your monsters, and you need to define your value system, because that really is, in the face of the uncertainty we spoke about in the beginning with, the farmer or if you don't have a value system and you can't in-reach, nothing out there is going to save you. And I think that's becoming more and more evident as, as time speeds by and changes are on fast forward, if you don't have a safety and a wisdom and a value system inside, the outreach is going to disappoint. And if you're dependent on it, then it's just more diminishing of us as human beings.
So we just got cut off there midway through our podcast, and for some reason it didn't record, but we had a great conversation. But we'll pick it back up where we got cut off, Ursula. So we were just speaking, you were talking about the importance for parents to start inreach instead of just outreach, instead of just looking for support from doctors or other people for their children. So how to look inwards, and in that way they can actually help their child. So you were speaking about a value system as well, and coming up with a value system. So what would a value system be, just as an example, or how would you describe that for people who are maybe unsure what that is?
No, that's a great question. So value system, I suppose, historically speaking, that would have been the religious domain, and I think together with religious values came a lot of dogma, and I think today that's not something that's popular or acceptable. It's diminishing, really, of the human being. But the values, an overarching value, also historically would have been love your neighbor. And I think, though, it was taken out of context, meaning the second part of that is as yourself. Love your neighbor as yourself. So if we're very busy, again, outreaching, outdoing, without first inreaching and loving self, not in a selfish way, but in a way of loving all parts of me as a growing, flawed human being, that's the place to start. Because if I don't do that, I really can't love or support anybody else. So love your neighbor as yourself is an international value. I think that is a worthy value, and if it's taken in context of first self and then other. Other values can be decided within the family, like qualities like respect or loyalty, those kind of qualities that a family would decide for themselves that this is essential in our family. And also putting family first, I think, is a value, rather than, again, the neighbor or out there. Our family unit comes first, and then we support, we help, we give and outreach to the others. So they're just some examples of values. But again, it's a great contract for a family to have between them and themselves. What is our anthem? What is our value system? And to have it defined, because that's what the children will carry that on into their adult years and onto their their growth, as something that's defined and not something that's imbibed as I think we used to do that, or I think that was, but defined and transferable, I think, would be important.
Yeah, that's brilliant, and it's very clear and simple just to think about what is important for us. But I think it's something we don't do enough of, is like, think about that and actually state that, as a family coming together, like, this is what we believe in and this is what's important. And as you mentioned, we would have done this with, religious practices, and a lot of people nowadays don't necessarily, not as much people anyway, go to mass, or in Ireland at least, and I'm sure other countries, and we've kind of started to move away from organized religion, but it's still important for us to have some of the things that they did have that were really useful were the value systems. As you said, the dogma wasn't very useful a lot of the time, but it was the value systems and bringing people together, and loving thy neighbor as thyself, and all of those things are still important for us to have. So I think we have the opportunity now to start to look at traditions beyond our own. Like, for me, I'm really interested in Buddhism and Hinduism and even the Gnostic Christianity and all of that stuff, the original. But that's just for me to understand different viewpoints so I can make up my own decision on what's important to me and have my own values. So I think it's a chance for people to start to think about these things, what's important to me and our family, and having some sort of ritual maybe around that to like can reconnect you, because you can set values. There's a lot of businesses out there that set their values and at some meeting and then they never talk about them again, and it's like they're not really lived. So it's like, how can you live those values? And one example I often reflect on is one of my friends, Morris, up in Donegal. He told me that he has a little ritual every morning with his family, his partner and his kids, and they gather around in a circle and hold hands and meditate for like 10 minutes together. And I think that's just a lovely example of how simple it can be. It doesn't have to be, a big complicated thing. It's just stating this is important, and we're connecting together as a family, and we're connecting with ourselves as well.
But I think it's important that there are behaviors that support the value, as opposed to having it something that's, in theory, but the behavior has to support the value, and out of role modeling comes in with that. But yeah, it's a good combination of both the value and a behavior that supports the value.
Yeah. And yeah, just in terms of, as well, you were talking about loving yourself and as important as loving others. And I think a lot of us, myself included, we can tend to try and help everyone else and focus on everyone else and care about everyone else. But we struggle to, give that same care to ourselves. It's something I'm still working on.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I suppose, yeah, you also mentioned befriending your monsters. And I feel, if you don't start to look inwards, I think there's the avoidance there, I suppose, isn't there, to look in because of those monsters.
Yeah, it really is. And, we can feel, we can laud ourselves for helping everybody else and doing good for everybody else. But very often it's ego based. It's like, I'm feeling good about myself when I do that. Or on the other hand, like you said, it's running away from looking inside myself. And there's a story about the Boy Scout. He sees this elderly lady at a pedestrian crossing and she's got a white stick. So he understands she doesn't see very well. So he says, "Oh, it's my chance, I'm going to run up here." And he takes her arm and, walks her across the road. And he feels great about himself. But she didn't want to cross the road. So it's that attunement of, it's not, I need to help everybody. It's about first attuning to myself and my needs, and then I'll be attuned to the needs of the other. So yeah.
Yeah. No, that definitely makes sense. And I've definitely been the Boy Scout many times, just trying to help people and thinking I knew what was best for them. I'm like, oh, you all need to cross the road because I've crossed the road. It's like, maybe they're not ready or they don't want to cross the road. Maybe they're on a different road.
Yeah, I know that
So,
myself too.
yeah. But yeah, and I suppose when you're talking to parents, I know you do talks with parents as well as part of your work. What kind of response do you get when you talk about, topics such as this? Because I can imagine, when you say things like seeing, what you don't like in one of your children is something you don't want to look at in yourself. And I presume that can be quite triggering for parents to hear that. So like, what's the response when you start to share this wisdom with parents?
So I feel parents that come to listen, they have an openness to hear. So that's the first point. And I think the second point is, speaking generally, there's great value in parents understanding the intergenerational programming that we all have. Messages passed down, again, not consciously, like we spoke about earlier, but we imbibe them. And they're passed down from grandparents to parents to us to children. And we're not even conscious that it's happening. So even to create an awareness within parents that this is happening, you are educating your child the same way that you were educated. And that's great because you received some great values and great messages from your parents. And also there were dysfunctions. So if you're not aware of those, you're passing them on. And so I think that would be, a central message in a general conversation to parents, just making them aware of how subconscious and unconscious parenting can be, and to offer the opposite, which would be conscious parenting, which, is benefiting the parent and also benefiting the child. So it's not pointing out specifically you're doing something wrong, or you're a link in a chain of messaging that if you don't consciously change it, it just gets passed on.
And yeah, I've seen this in myself too, and how subtle it can be, where you don't even realize you've taken on a belief or a pattern from your parents, and it's only from like lots of introspection and other people reflecting it back to me a lot of the time too. It's like, oh, you do this thing, and I'm like, oh my god, I'm so like my dad or someone like my mom, because yeah, that's just how we learn, just as you said, imbibing, not necessarily fully consciously. So yeah, I think
But Paul, I do want to say, I'm sorry, but I don't, there's
yeah,
no blame involved here, because every parent absolutely, absolutely does their best.
yeah,
So it's not at all about pointing fingers. It's just taking responsibility to do it better. So just that's a really important point, I think.
yeah, exactly. And yeah, I also the same. I don't blame my parents for any of
Mm.
my habits or behaviors. And I suppose when you get to the age like of an adult, it's up to you to. It may not be your fault for certain behaviors, but it's your responsibility. And your parents, obviously, they're all just doing the best. And I suppose now we have the chance, like as a generation of young people, to have all this information at our fingertips about trauma and about how the brain works and how the body works. And now we have the chance to consciously parent where our parents didn't, because this
Mm.
was not talked about at all. So um and yeah, in terms of, I suppose this podcast is about education, and something I've realized from trying to integrate well-being into education over the last number of years is that we can't just focus on helping the students, um because we have to help the parents, and we have to help the teachers, and we have to help the principals or the school leaders, because it's a whole community and it's a whole ecosystem that has to work together. Um, but in terms of education in Ireland specifically, is there anything you've seen from your time in the US or in Israel, anything you've seen that is maybe done better over there, or something we could adopt in Ireland? Or, are we a little bit behind, or are we just different, or what do you feel there?
So I feel that um, wounds are culture specific, meaning every culture and every country has its own wound. And I think it's a mistake to follow after, the journey of another country, because it's not necessarily relevant to our journey. And it happens a lot, particularly with America. Like America very often sets the tone for education and mental health in the world. And the cultural wound I'm suggesting of America is it's built on immigrants, and the overused saying of pulling yourself up by your bootstraps in America. It's like you have to make something of yourself, and that's totally reflected. We spoke about passing down messages, totally reflected still today in America, where I worked briefly, interned in university campuses, and the pressure of the students to make something of themselves and to succeed is unbelievable. And therefore, there's massive medication and in the States. So I think that's a culture specific wound, of having to make something of yourself, from the old immigrant messaging. Um, in Ireland, if I would suggest, I dare to suggest maybe the a wound I would see here is betrayal. I think there's a culture of betrayal in Ireland, meaning within the family, even as a nation. And that sounds like, these are again messages over the decades of what will the neighbors think, or why can't you be like the neighbor's child or husband, or even today in the supermarkets, you see like a mother pushing her child out of the way. Get out of that lady's way. In other words, the message is you're in the way, or you're not as good as, or so that I'm calling it betrayal is. I think that's an old message that has been passed down here, and I think it's worthy of looking at that and imbuing first within the family, imbuing the sense of you are not in the way, you are worthy as you, um, is a good, I think, place to start with that repair.
That's a big one, and such an important insight, I think, because even myself, it's like you can get used to looking at America and like, oh, what are they doing? And they must have the answers because they have, some of the leading scientists or whatever, and people looking into, or psychologists or whatever it is, and we tend to look over there. But as you said, maybe that's not going to work here because we have different woundings. And yeah, I know for myself, just in my own practices that I do, like connecting to the land is something that's very important for me. And it's not something I'm seeing or finding from people in America. It's like I'm finding it from people in Ireland. So it's, yeah, we all have different ways to heal and to connect to ourselves. And yeah, it's also, yeah, to like really understand those wounds, first of all, because if we don't understand them, then we can't really, start to, go deeper into them and heal them. So, yeah, it definitely resonates, that sense of children aren't, there's still a culture where, children aren't as, respected, or their voices aren't heard the same. And like in Ireland, children only got rights, I think, back in the 90s, if I'm not wrong. So it's a new thing for children to like be heard and seen. And it's not long ago, like you hear my parents talking about being, beaten up in school, and just like that fear of speaking out, or the fear of being yourself, the fear of being too loud, like all these things. And it's no wonder there is kind of a suppression in a lot of Irish people, and suppression of emotions, and suppression of their true selves. So yeah, that's a really interesting point that you bring up there. And just to inform, like, how we do well-being needs to be tailored to the culture. And yeah, it's really interesting.
I think globally also there is, I was just reading recently how, we're all infected with this disease of pursuit. And I think that very much comes also from, maybe the American model of, it's out there like, fame and fortune, but it's all out there pursuing and running after and controlling, and it diminishes the human being because you end up never being enough and never having enough, as opposed to what we said earlier. All your riches are within, like that in reach is the antithesis of this disease of pursuit. It's said that the most valuable commodity on the market today is the human mind. In other words, multinationals are trying to find ways to attract your mind and investing billions in attracting your attention, in order that you should buy, or that you should invest in, or that you should. So if only we would realize that the preciousness and the value of, again, this inside the mind and what's inside us, and we give it away. And I just, I think that's again feeding into this in reach and know your worth.
Yeah, such an important reminder from what we were speaking about at the start, and how we were talking about everything being this kind of focus on the external pursuit and not coming back to the self and finding that safety where we can grow naturally. So it's not a striving to like reach for the light. It's just a natural growth, like a tree. You don't see a tree stressed out trying to get to the sun. It's just naturally growing. So in that safe environment. And I think that's such an important thing for our culture. I even noticed that today myself, I'm reading a book at the moment called The Hidden Power of the Five Hearts, and it's all about connecting to the heart. But she talks about rush energy, when you're like in this energy of like rush, and I still have it, like rushing to get ready for the podcast or do the next task on my list of to-do list. And being an entrepreneur, you have an unending list of tasks, so it can be understandable, but it's like you can easily miss out on life by just being in this rush energy all the time. You're not actually present. You're always like pursuing the future. And the realization, I suppose in the book she was saying, when you come back to your heart, it kind of calms you down. You come out of this mind, because the mind is more connected to ego, wanting to achieve certain things. And if you just come back to the heart, you can come back to the present moment. And as you said, that's, I suppose, in reach, and you have all of this abundance of presence, and that's all you need. It's like that's the goal of life, is just to be present. So, and just in terms of, I suppose, I feel like we could talk about loads of different things, and
Right.
I'd maybe have to get you back for another podcast, because we only have so long on this one. But in terms of where people can find you or can reach out if they want Craniosacral, or if they're interested in any other work that you do, what's the best way for people to get in touch?
Yeah, thank you. Well, email really is the best way for me. I'm actually, I offer periodically workshops for women, complimentary workshops, and I'm actually giving one on the 22nd of this month. So it's introspective learning about much of what we've spoken. So if anybody is interested in that or being on a list for the next one, my email is Ursula, URSULA, orah, ORAH, @gmail.com.
And where's the women's workshop going to be?
It's here in Sligo, yeah.
It's in Sligo. Okay. Yeah, lovely part of the country. But yeah, Ursula, it's been such a pleasure, and hopefully we've also spoken about the potential of you working with Wolf Academy to help us develop some of our programs for parents, because that's something we're looking into, getting funding first. So it'd be so great to have your wisdom and bring more of this kind of approach to people, and hopefully it makes an impact in the lives of young people as well. So thanks again for all the work you're doing, and hopefully speak to you soon.
Yeah, Cormac, could I end with the quote that we began with?
Oh, go for it.
It's it's from Dr. Fritz Smith, and he says, if you can hold something to neutral without judgment or comparison, holding it in its own space, it will then naturally move to its highest potential. So again, it's just about the holding and creating safety with clear, consistent boundaries, and then the true self can emerge.
I love that quote. So thank you, Ursula, and thank you everyone for listening. And as Ursula said, if you would like to get in touch, her email is in the show notes, and she also has a workshop coming up, so you can check that out there too. And we look forward to speaking with you again soon, some point, Ursula. And for everyone else, we'll see you on the next podcast.